The injuries for the Florida Panthers and the drop in play has been a major downer this season, but it's not all doom and gloom as they currently stand in the top 10 for lottery odds.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, February 9th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the nation's #1 sports podcasting network, and it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. Today, we are going to discuss all about the draft lottery odds, where the Florida Panthers now currently stand in the top 10 after their loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Top 10 in points percentage, not necessarily points. We're going to discuss where the confusion was as far as the messaging for the pick, and we're also going to discuss what happens if the Panthers do and end up getting there, and how the Panthers should approach the rest of the regular season. And also, we are going to discuss that the Panthers will have multiple options, not just in making the pick, but as far as ways to improve their roster in the now, because the Panthers are still, in fact, in their championship window. But let's begin with the clarification of the fact that the Panthers, as of Thursday night going into Friday, which we recorded post game on after the game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, which they lost that one, and then the very next morning, Frank Seravalli of Victory Plus tweeted saying all the top 10 picks and had the Florida Panthers in the 10th spot. And then there was so many questions about that for, hey, how are the Panthers in the top 10? Because we were led to believe that the Panthers pick to Chicago in the Seth Jones trade was unprotected. But a few things changed as far as the messaging from that trade to opening night to now, because it is on record for when I spoke about the trade at this point 11 months ago, when they made the trade on March 1st, that we were discussing the trade being a top 10 protected pick. So that is what I discussed on the show. So that part I got correct as far as that. But the part that changed was the fact that there was a little bit of things that were unresolved based on still a first round pick that the Panthers had to ship out in the Matthew Tkachuk trade to Calgary, which crazy to think that 3 years later that Calgary's finally making that pick. And then at the beginning of the season, when we were discussing and previewing the season for the Panthers, a lot of people around league circles, and because this was on public sites as well, discuss about how the Panthers trade to Chicago for that first round pick in 2026 was unprotected. However, the tweet and with Frank Seravalli confirming with multiple sources, he confirmed that the first round pick for this year, this upcoming draft for the Panthers, is in fact top 10 protected. So that is in fact the case. So honestly, and I'm part of the issue here as far as not questioning it, because when it was discussed about the Panthers being having that pick top 10 protected, and then when we discussed it being unprotected, I didn't really bat an eye at the time when I saw that change, when I originally thought it was top 10, because we know that the Panthers are coming off back-to-back championships, and we didn't even question a single thing about it when it came to that. But a lot of injuries and the drop in play later, and here the Panthers are, and now there's a big discussion point. There was, at least, on Twitter, Instagram, all these other platforms, and now there's clarification, which the Panthers front office knew about this the whole time. It was about public sites and journalists and fans also not getting that messaging there. But here is proof that even sites like Puckpedia and Tankathon did not have it right neither. So it was misleading people like us, and then it had us misleading you guys based on the fact that that wasn't the case for the Panthers condition. So this was a screenshot that I had of Puckpedia just an hour after Frank Seravalli made that tweet. So here's the first one for the conditions of the pick sent to Chicago in the Seth Jones Spencer Knight deal. So this says that the pick has been officially resolved for the Panthers. And it says pick slides to 27 if Florida trades their 2026 pick prior to the 2025 draft. But it doesn't say in here about it being top 10 protected here. So there's a lot of confusion in the wording here. And I'm going to go to the next screenshot here from Tankathon. Again, an hour after the fact that Frank Seravalli made that tweet, it said the Panthers are in the top 10, but that pick is sent to Chicago here. And now I'm going to show you two more screenshots about the changes. Voila, look at that. Look at the conditions if you're watching this on YouTube about now it's saying unresolved. And here's what it says. Pick slides to 2027 unprotected if either 2026 first is top 10 protected, which it says also in parentheses, unresolved, or 2026 first sent to Calgary from Matthew Tkachuk trade resolved. So not the case as far as the latter, but the former still has yet to be determined there for the Panthers here. And then now look at the second screenshot, the fourth screenshot, excuse me, of the current lottery odds for everyone inside the lottery, which now it says that the Florida Panthers are officially in that top 10 spot, and you see the lock there for the protections. So there's a lot of confusion from opening night to now that even the Panthers in-house media people were confused. So the Jameson Olives and the Doug Plagans were led to believe as well. The people in their own building were confused, which I get it. There's in-house media, but at the same time, Bill Zito and the PR department is not obligated to just come up to us and say, hey, that is in fact top 10 protected. Bill Zito knew this. The front office of the Chicago Blackhawks, they also knew this. So they're not going to be angry about the fact of now that it's public knowledge that it is top 10 protected for the Florida Panthers here. But this is also some great negotiating from Bill Zito in the case that he set himself up for success instead of failure. But again, I will say that even if it was unprotected and the fact that the Panthers season continued to go down the toilet as it has been this year, that it's still a very successful trade because you result in a championship, which banners fly forever. And we're always forever thankful for those moments. But this is just an added additional bonus here for the Florida Panthers. The fact that you could possibly get a player in your system a lot earlier. And it's not just a top 10 pick in the first round, but it's multiple rounds that you get earlier that you get to put players back. And hopefully that accelerates their time as far as at least the later picks get them seasoning in college or junior hockey, wherever they are. And then they make their way to the AHL, and then they come back, come into the Panthers system and their NHL squad a little bit earlier than expected, which we've seen a success story like Sandis Vilmanis, even Cole Schwent, even though he wasn't necessarily a Bill Zito pick, but he did reclaim him, and that's not a first-round pick for the Panthers that has been very successful as far as this season. But you see how fast-tracked guys like Vilmanis has been, even Jack Devine getting some action for the Panthers. You hope that someone like Grayson Sachin can at least doesn't have a major setback in his recovery as he's out for the season this year in Charlotte. But maybe for him that he gets to the point where he's playing well, to the point that he can make an impact come next year if his recovery does go well for himself. But we've seen so many trades in the NHL go wrong for certain teams when certain conditions don't go their way. For example, when the Ottawa Senators traded for Matt Duchene, and that pick ended up being the 4th overall pick. Well, the first pick that they got to choose whether they wanted to keep it or not, they decided to transfer it the very next year, unprotected. And that's when the Ottawa Senators picked Brady Tkachuk. And then that pick moved to the very next year, where they still ended up in the top 5, but that was traded to Colorado, unprotected there. And that's where the Avalanche got Bowen Byram to help them, a player, get in there as far as helping them eventually get their Stanley Cup with that group of players that they have in the McKinnons and Makars and Landeskog's there. But also, the Senators found a way to get a top 5 unprotected pick as well in the Erik Karlsson trade that they got, which ended up being number 3 overall, which they got Tim Stützle there. In one draft, you were able to at least build a young core of players, and although they still, it's a very flawed hockey team, there's still valuable pieces there, and that's based on trades and the fact that they were able to get picks unprotected, at least in the 2020 draft. But we've seen them be on the opposite side. But so for the Panthers here, if they end up getting the top 10 pick, which is a very, very strong draft this year, it's an absolute win for 2 straight championships. And the fact that you get one down year, which we're hoping it's only one for the Panthers, you get to have a body in Florida, and not necessarily playing on the NHL level, but you have that opportunity to at least get it sooner instead of waiting. So if it's top 10, then next year's 2027 to Chicago will be unprotected, and then 2028 to Boston for Brad Marchand, which doesn't say whether it's unprotected or not, but I'm going to guess that it's going to be, in fact, unprotected, because the fact that it was moved a year later there. But coming up, just because the Panthers have great odds to be in the top 10 does not mean they'll necessarily get there. We'll discuss the lottery rules and basically how the Panthers should go about things from here. We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Factor. And cold days, packed schedules, and big goals. That's winter. And when there's not a lot of time to cook, eating well can feel like another thing on the to-do list. That's where Factor comes in. Factor makes healthy eating easy with fully prepared meals designed by dietitians crafted by chefs, so you can eat well without the planning, prepping, or cooking. Factor meals are always fresh, never frozen, and ready in about 2 minutes. And the ingredients stand out: lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole foods, and healthy fats. No refined sugars, artificial sweeteners, nor seed oils. Options like high protein, calorie smart, and Mediterranean diet, GLP-1 support, and even the new Muscle Pro collection for strength and recovery. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off and free breakfast for a year. Eat like a pro this month with Factor. New subscribers only, varies by plan. 1 free breakfast item per box for 1 year while subscription is active. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. And if you haven't already, make sure you check out our whteher Club. And it's an access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Florida Panthers listeners, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. It's an invite to the Locked On members-only Discord server, which includes group chat for listeners of the show. And tap the link in the show notes to learn more. So let's discuss a little bit about how, yes, the Panthers are currently right at number 10 as far as being in the lottery, which, again, this also means that they are in the running for the number 1 overall pick, the fact that there is in fact a lottery. But let's go over their odds first of all to possibly get the first overall pick, which right now for the Panthers here, they are at a 3.5 chance from winning the lottery. And the new rules that they have for the lottery is that you could only jump up to 10 spots. So if the Panthers end up as the very last team in, which will be the 15th. In most years, it'll be 16th, but in this year, it's 15th because the Ottawa Senators have forfeited their first-round pick for 2026 in a failed trade for the as far as hiding the trade list for Evgeny Dodonov when the Vegas Golden Knights tried trading him to the Anaheim Ducks. So Ottawa did not provide that, and that was under previous ownership, and then this ownership is facing the consequence of that. So they had the option to delay the forfeit of the pick. So this is the last year that they could have had to forfeit it. So the previous 2 years they decided to keep their pick, but this is the year that they are forfeiting it. So that gives the Panthers an opportunity to move into the top 10 no matter what. But you want to at least be 11 and below if the Panthers are going to in fact not make the playoffs. But more on that in just a second. But just discussing more about that again, we discuss moving up 10 spots. It happened to the New York Islanders just last year as a team that went up to first overall, and they now with the new rules as well, you cannot win the lottery as far as moving up slots again in a 5-year period if you do in fact move. If you do stay in the spot that you were projected and you win the lottery, like for example, the Vancouver Canucks, right now they have the worst points percentage in the NHL. If they win the lottery, that rule does not apply to them. If they are last in the NHL again next year, they can win the lottery again. So you are still going to get a little bit rewarded if you are actually that bad in consecutive years. So that is that scenario for them at least. But here's also, and there's screams from the fan base, and even in some group chats that I'm a part of, whenever it's discussing for the Panthers and their and the fans wanting this team to tank, because again, I don't believe that the Panthers have the horses right now in order to make the playoffs. I think it's still a major long shot, as right now they are in the 20s as far as percentage to make it. But here's the thing: front offices tank, but players do not. But in a tanking situation, but this front office for the Panthers hasn't even put themselves in the position to tank in the first place. So I don't think that this Panthers team and this front office is necessarily exactly rooting for a tank, because there's still a belief in this group that they can make a little bit of history there. And the players are not going to look at each other in the eye and say, oh, let's get this pick. Let's just lay down and not give it our all in these last 25 games. No way, Jose, for this group. They are going to still fight until the very end. They're still going to try to give themselves an opportunity to at least get under the cut line. Above the cut line, So, but also the fact that this team could be fighting for that spot in the playoffs, even if they end up between 11 and 16, it's going to speak volumes as well to the culture of when they want to acquire guys, whether even though free agency is now a dud based on the amount of players who have extended or found a way to get to different places via trade, like recently Artemi Panarin. I'm not expecting Alex Tuck of the Buffalo Sabres to hit the open market. Now he's the biggest free agent now for 2026, but everyone else has done their extensions. But for the role players and the edges that the Panthers are going to be trying to fill in the offseason, they are going to look at the Panthers fight this season and they're going to say, wow, look at that team. They dealt with these circumstances and they still found a way to scratch and claw, even if it doesn't result in 2 points every single night for this team. So that there is also a benefit for this Panthers team in still trying to go for it. But it's a bonus. I will say it feels like an absolute bonus if the Panthers do end up, and Bill Zito's not going to complain. I know the fan base is not going to complain. I won't complain if the Panthers do end up, because we haven't really covered drafts in recent years here on the podcast, so it also gives me a little bit of material as far as what to prepare for and the various options that the Panthers could have here, which in this draft, it's not really center heavy for the Panthers here to look at. It's mostly wingers and defensemen, and mostly right shot defensemen, which we see for the Panthers. We see Seth Jones being on the top pair, on the second pair, Aaron Ekblad. But then there's that opportunity to get a guy for life after possibly those guys, and even start a guy off in the third pair. Like, for example, those guys who are right shot defensemen, Keaton Verhoff, who plays for the University of North Dakota, Chase Reed, who plays for the Sioux Greyhounds in the OHL, and other guys like Ryan Lynn for the Vancouver Giants in the WHL, Daxton Rudolph, Prince Albert Raiders. So those are some right-handed shot D that the Panthers could use. But at the same time, the Panthers are also having to need to discuss life after Sergei Bobrovsky, as well as he's currently in his age 37 season. I assume that the Panthers will extend him on a short-term deal at a really low AAV in order to at least, and chances are by the end, he'll officially be the backup. But as far as the draft, the Panthers don't have there's not really a top 10 first round projected goalie in the draft, but also you can get goalies in any round, develop them, and they could find a way to be superstars. Like Sergei Bobrovsky was undrafted, so it's a crapshoot. Let's not forget that the draft is in fact that. So that there is that opportunity for the Panthers to package something in a trade. Is it necessarily going to be that first round pick? No. So there's also that situation for the Panthers there. But let's actually continue that conversation more on the other side of the break, because there's also, once again, another opportunity, if you want to call it opportunity, for the Panthers to actually land in that spot based on the fact that 10 players are going to the Olympics. We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And if you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't a right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I need to hire someone for the show, I go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just resume buzzwords. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are best matched for your roles and make a real difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly to Indeed are 90% more likely to report higher than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes, less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help your job get the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. And I hope everybody had a great Super Bowl Sunday. We are recording this before the Super Bowl, so I don't know what the results of the game are going to be. It is by the time this comes out, and I hope that by the time this comes out that we are discussing a Seahawks win, because those suffering Patriot fans have been through so much over these last 7 years. They deserve so much. I say that sarcastically. I hope they get nothing in this, and that they set the record for most Super Bowl losses here. And that's something that I will say to multiple Patriot fans if that's the case. But speaking of hated teams, the Florida Panthers are the most hated team in the NHL. And that definitely came to light more on Thursday night in Tampa Bay, which what happened with their game in against the Tampa Bay Lightning, as far as all the brouhaha and the line brawls that we saw, especially in the third period against the Tampa Bay. And how hilarious would that be? Yes, the Panthers being at the current top 10 in the lottery, have a 3.5% chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. And how hilarious would that be? 2-time defending champions, misses the playoff in their one gap year, are expected to be healthy come the next season, and they could end up as the number 1 overall pick. That would be pure comedy, and that would just ignite the hate even more for this Florida Panthers team. And for a chance to get someone like Gavin McKenna on your team, or like an Ivar Stenberg, that is awesome. That is a great opportunity. But if that pick does end up in the top 5, I wouldn't be quite sure that the Panthers would be so quick to trade that pick there, because you at least want an opportunity to see what your coaches can do in as far as getting them in development camp, and even if they decide to sign their ELC to begin with, which the Panthers could try to also delay them in signing their entry-level deal so that their RFA years and then UFA years based on their signing age and their seasons played can also delay a little bit. That's like, they use that term in baseball, service time manipulation. This could be that. But the earlier the pick, the less likely it is for that pick to delay signing. But with a contending team like the Florida Panthers, whose window is still open, I wouldn't say wide open, but still open, because this isn't a team that has gotten older, that is, it's a win-win for the Panthers if they end up getting there. So that is, and again, this is a very strong draft class for this year. So the one year that you're having a downer, this is that year to do it. So maybe three-peat is not in the books, but listen, 3 cups in 4 to 5 years in that span is still, it's still by definition a dynasty. It's still leaving a legacy here in South Florida. And if they already have young players around them, like guys like Anton Lundell, who had a lot of praise, like we mentioned, from Paul Maurice as being the next captain of the Panthers after Barkov hangs it up. And guys who are success stories as of right now, in the cases of Sandis Vilmanis. If Mackey ever develops, he could be possibly one of those guys to carry the Panthers in the next wave, even though he may be in a situation where the Panthers could trade him this offseason. I don't put that off the table because of necessarily his style of play versus the fit in the system. That's also gives you an opportunity to get a NHL ready player if you want to transition that to the back end, which the Panthers will have open space opened up. And again, this is the benefit of guys taking less money in Brad Marchand, Aaron Ekblad this past offseason, and then even in the most recent offseason, in the previous offseason, excuse me, Sam Reinhart signing for 8.6, which he could have signed easily for more than that, around the 10 million. So with the Panthers having that cap, literally cap as in captain for Barkov, as far as like his salary at 10 million and Bobrovsky's contract coming off the books, the Panthers still have so much space in order to still create a winner, whether it is in fact number 1 overall or not, or even in that top 10. Where it gets tricky is where if the Panthers land outside of it, again, it speaks a lot to the culture for the Panthers if they do end up going for it. But if you're right at that 10 mark, you consider options for trades, at least, because Bill Zito is going to be salivating at the opportunity for to bring someone ready to bring to this team. So they're don't write that off the table neither for this Panthers team. And we've seen the classic Bill Zito fleece over his time as general manager of the Florida Panthers, which not every single trade he's had to trade a first for. Like, for example, Sam Bennett, you traded 2 second round picks, excuse me. which he ended up as the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. He's had great playoff numbers, even going back to Calgary, and then we've seen it over and over again. Which again, you pay Sam Bennett the $8 million based on his playoff performance versus regular season, and when the lights are brightest, we see Sam Bennett perform to his absolute best. I mean, especially in that one game against the Oilers where it was the Sam Bennett shift, multiple hits, and then goes on a breakaway opportunity to score a goal, which was an absolute beauty. Brandon Montour, he was traded for a 3rd-round pick to the Buffalo Sabres. Got him in the building. He earns a Stanley Cup for the Panthers. And not only that, he earns a great contract by the Seattle Kraken. And also, again, like we mentioned earlier in the show, the Matthew Tkachuk trade. That 1st-round pick that was traded to Calgary doesn't actually get picked until 3 years, 3 full seasons of Matthew Tkachuk playing for the Panthers. And it ends up 32nd overall for the Calgary Flames. And also, I want to send our thoughts to former Panther Jonathan Huberdeau, who completed their game against the Edmonton Oilers, who actually delayed surgery, wanted to end the season well, and he did, which he scored multiple goals there. And he is now shut down for the season as he is going to get hip surgery, and now he won't be completing it for the Flames. But talk about one of the worst trades for Calgary to make, as well as Huberdeau having the full no move clause throughout the entirety of the deal, and his production has fallen off. So an absolute win for Bill Zito there. So we've seen this happen over and over again. We can argue what he did as far as the Ben Sherratt deal, Claude Giroux for only half a season, but other than those trades that he's made, when he traded Sam Reinhart for first, Devin Levi was seen as a top goalie prospect, even though he was a 7th-round pick, and now we don't even know if he's going to be part of the future in Buffalo for the Sabres, which they got great goaltending in. Alex Lyon, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is up and down. So as far as the injuries, which he's not going to be playing for the Olympics for Team Finland, but there's still questions there as far as that trade. But also the fact that Chicago is possibly, I wouldn't say screwed, because again, these front offices knew about the conditions. We just in the public did not. And they're not going to benefit from the Panthers not being in a great position as far as wins this year. That if the Panthers are fully back next year and they end up in the playoffs, that it's going to be above number 16. That if you're Kyle Davidson, you're not quite happy about. But that's what you negotiated, and you agreed on the trade, and the NHL approved it. So can't take that one back neither. And then Boston, which we didn't even know how impactful Brad Marchand was going to be, first of all, when they put the conditions of the trade, because the conditions was it would upgrade to a 1st-round pick if the Panthers made the conference final, at least, and if Brad Marchand played 50% of the games. Brad Marchand played every single game. And yeah, he didn't make his Panthers debut until 2 weeks after the trade, but still, and the fact is, them making the conference final, and even if they fell short, that still would have been a 1st-round pick. And you would have felt like something was missing for this Panthers team, because they felt they would, if they would have fallen short, but they still got that far and finished the job. They crossed the finish line multiple times, and that's the beauty of a gamble as far as what Bill Zito has consistently made, and the fact that general managers have found ways to not be the winners of trades. And again, Bill Zito has not won a Jim Gregory Award, but he'll take those 2 Stanley Cups and multiple rings over on his hands more than that. But again, that gets voted after round 2. as far as that year's general manager. So he's not going to win it this year, more than likely. But if the Panthers are back and they're back in the conference final, again, it'll be like a better late than never as far as like earning that award. So, but I'm excited thinking about it. But at the same time, there's still a season to be played. Let's not lose sight of that. Let's enjoy it. Let's enjoy it. But first of all, let's enjoy the Olympics first. It's been an awesome tournament with Team USA winning the game between Canada and Switzerland. That was a pure domination, even though it was 1-0 after 2 periods. And then Canada pulled away. But the men's tournament starts in just a few days. But it has been a very exciting Olympic Games. But this is also the part where we get to enjoy, because there's no guarantee that the Panthers will also, those players who are going overseas to Milan, will also come back healthy. So that's also a big question mark on if the Panthers, their group of guys, can even finish the year. So that's something to monitor throughout these next 2 weeks. And we'll be here to discuss it all, but we got to discuss the housekeeping here for the conditions of this pick. But yeah, just wanted to discuss all of this and more with you guys to give you guys the clarity you guys deserve here. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. We're going to be back on Tuesday to discuss more in everything in the world of the Florida Panthers and more for the Winter Olympic Games. Thank you as always for listening. And in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the shows on our Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.